Welcome back, barbarians. Up next on the podcast, I have a very special guest. Helena started testosterone treatments at age 18 to transition her gender. But after a year and a half of treatments, she finally came to the conclusion that she was not actually transgender, but rather, in her own words, the victim of social media propaganda and indoctrination by the educational system. Join us next week as we dive into her powerful story. So, once again, welcome, Helena. Starting off, first, I'd like to thank you for being here. You have a story that far more people need to hear, and it takes a lot of courage today to speak out on these issues. And I'm aware that you, like myself, have faced a lot of public backlash from the woke mob for your beliefs. And since I tend to be slandered as an intolerant person, I believe it's important to prove all those people wrong by continuing to build bridges with people and keep having these open discussions. It sends a powerful message while also letting others come to more educated decisions for themselves and their own lives. Furthermore, it's much more powerful hearing this from you yourself, since these days people really only seem to think in terms of boxes. It's the same reason women are more likely to respond to a woman speaking out against feminism and the single motherhood epidemic, as opposed to a man who does so, yet he'll just get written off as a sexist. And this is one of the issues I've dealt with in the past myself, working in healthcare, which is a field now primarily dominated by many divorced women and single mothers. Or in the case of Black Lives Matter, it means a lot more when black men like myself speak out against it, as opposed to white people who may be written off as racists for doing so. I realize this is all rigid thinking, but as you know, sadly, the world we live in now, many people are incapable of nuanced thought anymore, so when it comes to activism and civil disobedience, sometimes we need to modify the playing field to plan around virtue signaling. So, opening up here, I'd like to ask you some questions about the events leading up to your transition. As many will know, there is much cognitive dissonance today surrounding these issues. There's the generational gap, which affects the willingness of people to talk about it. There's also internet rabbit holes that many people remain ignorant to, so they will not understand how certain social agendas and reinforced messaging via social media, algorithms, and political echo chambers actually works today. But regardless of their age, my experience has been that hardly anyone wants to openly discuss these matters. Heterosexual people like myself who try to are almost always blasted by the media as bigots or intolerant and hateful. And just a side note, I've even heard students on my college campus make broad, overgeneralized statements like, quote, transition surgery is for the benefit of the patient for their mental health and well being. And I mention this because this is a logical fallacy and trope that many people just accept today. Their general assumption and belief typically being that individuals who do not receive these surgeries are at more risk of suicide, when in reality, there is actually a 40% suicide rate among transitioned individuals, indicating that there are far more cognitive and mental health issues going on, which actually have nothing to do with individuals being denied surgery, much less being bullied by people who don't accept them and their lifestyles. And that's also something else we'll discuss, as you've told me yourself that you actually received the most intolerance and bullying from your own trans community when you were affiliated with them and decided to detransition back to female. There is also a lot of corruption and fraud surrounding the gender surgery industry, as hospitals like Texas Children's Hospital have illegally performed gender transition surgeries on children while covering up the paper trail on their websites and trying to hide it from parents and the general public, which is why those institutions are now facing criminal charges and federal lawsuits, as they should. So as I stated, you have a very powerful story that more people need to hear, and your story is very unique. You transitioned and then detransitioned after coming to certain realizations. And those realizations you had are something that people who have not been affiliated in the trans community and have not gone through certain experiences would not be aware of. So I'd just like to open by asking you what your experience has been and how this all started.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was more of kind of a gradual process, almost of indoctrination. So it began around the time I was 15. I was going through a period in my life where I just didn't have a lot of friends. I was, about to switch schools, coming into high school. And I started relying on the internet a lot for just my day-to-day activities. I would just kind of I just had gotten a smartphone actually, and I was just sitting on the smartphone all day at school. And then I would come home, I would open my laptop, and I would just go back to browsing social media. And it was in that kind of environment that I was introduced to a lot of gender ideology, but also just kind of like leftist woke ideology as well. I grew up in a more kind of like mainstream Republican home. And so I was introduced to these ideas. And in order to really fit in socially, which I really wanted to do since I didn't have many friends in real life, I had to adopt these kind of like leftist beliefs. And in that context, I was learning a lot about how like white people are evil, cis people are evil, straight people are evil. And then on top of that, there was also messages telling me, well, if you feel like you don't fit in, that means you're trans. If you feel like you don't like your body, that means you're trans. If you feel like other girls don't understand you, that means you're trans. And so it was kind of like that convergence of those two lines of messaging that really led me to start thinking like, hey, well, maybe if I just change my pronouns, that'll give me an indication of if that's right for me. And then, you get those messages back at you that it's like, yes, you need to change your pronouns. Gender questioning is good. That's how you discover yourself. And by the way, only trans people question their gender. So if you're questioning your gender, that means that you're trans. So it was like, I kind of like began like that. And then it was a process of about 2 years where I just kept kind of like going further and further down that rabbit hole. I would change my pronouns, get a ton of positive affirmation. And then after a while, I would say like, I'm still uncomfortable with myself. I want to go a little bit further, kind of subconsciously thinking this way. So then I would like cut my hair, for example, and then tons of positive affirmation. I might change my pronouns again, tons of positive affirmation. And after kind of like 2 years of going down a rabbit hole like that, I ended up thinking, oh, well, I was actually meant to be a boy and I need to transition. So it wasn't like one day I just woke up and started believing that. It was kind of like this long process of being very detached from reality and not having a lot of social influences in real life to challenge or push back against some of the things I was learning online.